I'm currently in the planning process of building a wooden table for my layout. But first, a word of advice. Be careful who you buy train cars from on eBay. Here we have a Rapido Trains, Pennsylvania Railroad coach, and the original owner treated this train car so poorly that just making basic repairs to it caused it to break even further. For example, the coupler was broken, so I tried to replace it, but as soon as I removed the coupler box, it broke into three pieces. Now I'm trying my best to see if I can glue it back on, but I don't think the glue is going to hold up against the train forces, so I might have to just take this car out of service. This car was decommissioned as soon as it arrived. Not only that, but when I tried to fix one of its bogies, the bogie broke off, so I tried to screw it back on, only to find out that the hole that the screw is supposed to go in was broken completely to the point where you could not screw the bogie back onto the train car. Getting used train cars from eBay is always a mixed bag. Anyway, I need to replace these plastic tables with a wooden one because these plastic tables keep sagging. They're not as strong as you would think they would be. They cannot support the weight of these trains. Not only that, but even though these tables were purchased brand new, some of them arrived damaged, and some of them were already warped the moment they arrived. I don't know why, but it seems like these tables are not built the exact same way out of the factory because these two tables are brand new and they're not flush with each other. I had to use cardboard and plastic and stuff to support the tracks in order to keep them level in between these two tables. But the distance between these two tables faces keeps getting further and further, and I keep having to add more and more cardboard underneath the track to support it. But the cardboard keeps sagging, which causes the trains to decouple and sometimes even derail when they go over this section. I'm also going to get rid of my Kato track and replace it with Flex track. The reason being because it is next to impossible to make a proper slope out of Kato tracks. They're too rigid. Here we have an approach to a bridge, and I cannot get these tracks straight enough that the train won't decouple or derail when going over it. This table also keeps sagging, which constantly changes the track geometry. So even when I think I have the right measurements, a week later, they're different. There's also no way to fasten these tracks to the plastic tables, so the trains moving on the track keeps pushing them out of alignment. Just like the current setup, there's going to be a hallway in this location where I can get underneath the layout in order to service a train that may have derailed out of reach. I plan for this to be a two-level layout. On the bottom level is going to be a subway line, and on top is going to be where the conventional trains operate. Right here is where the bridge is going to be. To the right of that is where the train station is going to go. To the right of that station is a siding where subway cars can be parked when they're not in use. These tracks are going to be completely hidden from view, but there's going to be some access points where I can get to the train in case it derails. Here, the siding leads to a ramp that subway cars can use to access the upper level so that they can move into a siding where I can reach them and make necessary repairs. This line will only be designed for subway cars, so to prevent the wrong types of cars from entering the subway station, the curves on the approach to the ramp are going to be so sharp that only the subway cars can traverse them without derailing, and the ramp is going to be so steep that only the subway cars can traverse them without struggling. The ramp will lead to this sharp curve, which will then lead to this siding where the subways can enter the main line for a brief amount of time. Then they can pull into this siding, which is going to be a service track. Pretty much all the trains will pull into this track to be serviced. That way I won't have to lift the subway cars out of the tunnel in order to work on them. I can just pull them into this siding. Here is where a bridge on the upper level is going to go. And here's where the station on the upper level is going to go. I'm going to try to make it so that there's a mezzanine in between the subway station and the above ground station that you can actually look inside with actual walkways and stairways and elevators leading to the second level, if possible. Over here is a siding where all the locomotives and freight cars are going to be stored when they're not in use. Over here is where the Acela Express and some of the Autorack cars are going to be stored. Here you can see a more detailed map of one of the subway stations. This is a siding track that's only used for parking subway cars, and the platform that's attached to it is going to be abandoned. This double track siding leads to the upper level, and this leads to the bridge. To light the subway stations, I plan on using chandeliers. I haven't really designed the bridge yet, but so far, all I know is that it's going to have two levels. The lower level is going to be for the subway, and the upper level is going to be for the main line. I'm likely going to have to kit bash this because I highly doubt people actually make the type of bridge that I plan on making for this layout. I plan for it to be something similar to how the George Washington Bridge is set up, but only for trains. The subway tunnels are going to have a lot of sharp curves, so to help reduce the risk of derailment, I'm going to do exactly what the New York City subway does and place guardrails on all the curves. I'm also going to place them near interlockings and other types of switches so that the train doesn't derail on them. It's going to be really important for me to decide which subway cars I'm going to use early on because the tunnels are going to be designed with just enough room for the trains and not much else. There are two types of subway cars I'm thinking of using. One of them is the New York City subway, and the other one's a Bay Area rapid transit subway car. Now, one problem with these cars is they're a bit longer than the New York City subway cars, so if I went with this option, it would severely limit how sharp the curves could be. Another issue is that since they're currently pre-order only, that means that I won't even be able to start working on the layout until after I'm able to purchase them. Another option I've been considering are these New York City subway cars. The only problem with them is that I looked at a unboxing video of these recently and I found out that the cars don't have directional lighting. The locomotive has headlights and taillights, but they both light up at the same time, which is not really what I'm looking for. Also, to hide the electronics, the windows on the powered unit are grayed out. Another option I've been considering are these Toronto subway cars. These cars appear to be slightly longer than the New York City subway cars, so a little bit less versatile with how sharp the curves can be, but they are a bit more realistic. The windows aren't grayed out on the power car because they found a way to hide all of the electronics underneath the vehicle. The issue, of course, is that it's pre-order only. Now, I usually don't mind pre-orders. The issue is, in this case, they're not really telling me when it's going to be released, so I don't know when to expect this amount of money to come out of my checking account. When it comes to pre-ordering, I like to know when to expect hundreds of dollars to be taken out of my account, you know? Okay, the video is still a bit short, so in order to elongate it a bit, here's a quick announcement. I'm currently making an update to this bus, both the traffic version and the drivable version. Here are some pictures of what I have so far. Now, just like a lot of meshes on Google SketchUp, the original mesh for this bus was horribly inefficient polygon-wise, so I had to basically gut the mesh and make a new one from scratch. For the exterior of the bus, I literally had to make a new mesh from scratch and then carve all the necessary holes into it for the windows and doors and stuff. I managed to halve the polygons, this despite adding features to this bus like this rear destination sign that the original mesh didn't have. I'm also going to be animating the destination signs and making it so that you can change the destination signs on the bus. I'm also planning on animating the windshield wipers, which is going to be a huge pain because windshield wipers on buses do not wipe the windshield at the exact same time. They are way out of sync. It can take between 10 and 30 cycles for them to line up again. Here's the inside of the front-facing destination sign. It's currently blank because the animation is a separate mesh. Here's the interior of the bus. I literally had to delete everything and make everything from scratch because the textures were horribly inefficient. Earlier, there were several textures for every little thing on the bus. Right now, everything on the inside of the bus is textured with just one texture that has all of the colors found inside the bus. I had to add a pole here so that I could attach a mirror to it. This mirror is really important, by the way. It helps you see if there's someone standing in between the rear door before you close it so that you don't slam someone into the door. Here's a close-up of the rear-facing destination sign. Here's the rear door. I'm actually going to animate the doors on the drivable version of this bus, which is something I didn't do on the original one because I didn't know how to do that yet. And I also made a recording of the rear door opening and closing to use as a sound effect. Animating the back door is actually going to be pretty easy because there's literally nothing to animate besides the door itself. All of the moving parts are completely hidden on this door. The front door, on the other hand, I can tell that that one's not going to be easy. To show you what I mean, here's a picture of the back door. Notice its simplicity. It's just a thing that rotates and pushes the door outward. Now let's look at some pictures of the front to give you an idea of how difficult it'll be to animate this. First, we have this piece that's recessed into the door. It attaches to the middle of the door and it continues through the door and into the vehicle. There's one on each door, by the way. Here's what that piece looks like on the inside. Note how it's attached to a cylinder on the inside of the vehicle. And it's also at an angle so that it can fit in the doorway. Here's what that piece looks like from the same angle, but from the outside. The door also rolls on tracks that ensures that it takes a specific path while it's opening. On the top of the door, mounted at about the center, is another piece that attaches to the same cylinder we saw earlier. This also helps to guide it and make sure it takes a specific path while it's opening and closing. Here's a closer look at the track the door rolls on. Here's another picture at the bottom of the cylinder. And here's the top of the cylinder, where it attaches to the door. This device swings the door at a 90-degree angle while simultaneously dragging it towards the inside of the bus and pushing it towards the left or the right. It took me 2 weeks to make the door because of all the pieces that I have to animate doing a bunch of different things all at the same time while still being attached to each other. That was not a simple task. I actually had to change the shapes of a lot of these pieces while animating because they weren't the right size and they weren't, they were clipping through each other. Here's another picture of the door track and that piece that attaches to the cylinder on the top. It took me about a month to make the front door. I actually already made all the components for it. However, I won't really know if these sizes are accurate until I try to animate them. I had to carve a larger hole into the doorway and into the floor in order to make sure there was enough room for the door to open. On the buses I drive, the entrance for people with disabilities is in the front, but on this mesh, it appears to be in the back. I decided not to change it because that would be just way more work for me to do. Now, it was my original plan to make it so that you could actually control the ramp. However, I had to stop because in order to make the ramp work on the buses that I drive, you have to kneel the bus. And in order to make an animation of the bus kneeling in this game, I would have to make it so that the entire bus is kneeling, as well as everything inside the bus would have to be animated to kneel with the bus. Then I'd have to animate every single attachment point so that the attachment points and the things that are attached to the bus also kneel with the bus, and that would just be a logistical nightmare, so I decided not to do that. You can only control the doors. You can't kneel the bus and you can't use the ramp. In this game, there's no way to make it so that mirrors actually reflect what they would be reflecting in real life. So I did what a lot of creators do for this game. I just took a picture of the side of the bus and attached it to the mirror. Of course, it's not that realistic because it's just a picture, but that's all you can do with what you have. Here's the interior destination sign. This destination sign, like the other ones, will also have a detailed interior. Now here are some of the gauges. Now for the traffic version of this bus, I'm actually not going to put that much detail in the gauges because the vehicles in this game move at a set speed, so it wouldn't really make sense to do that. But in the drivable version of this bus, I'm actually going to animate as many of the gauges as the game will let me animate. So the air brake gauge And the speedometer is definitely going to be animated. I'm not really sure what I can do for the battery voltage gauge, the oil pressure gauge, and the antifreeze temperature gauge, but for the oil pressure gauge, I'm probably going to try to animate it like an ammeter gauge. For the air pressure gauge, I'm going to have to figure out which train brake gauge usually reads around 120 when the brakes are released and animate it as that, because that's the PSI that it's usually at in normal operation. There's a device over the driver's head that lets the driver know what destination they're selecting so that they can tell what's on the destination sign without actually having to get out of the vehicle. And I'm actually going to animate this as well. Here's a picture from behind the screen with the camera flipped 180 degrees. It was the only way I could get a close enough view of it because the screen is really small, smaller than the camera. But when you change the destination sign, it'll actually show what you're selecting in the game. Now, this is going to be animated in the traffic version, even though it's not really necessary, and that's because I don't want to have to make a separate animation file for two different versions of the same bus. So I'm just going to use the same one that I'm using for the driver animation. The bus is also going to have a working dashboard. Now, I'm not going to animate every single one of these lights, but just the ones that regularly come on in normal operation. By the way, it took me 3 tries to get a picture where you could actually read what's on the dashboard. These are my first 2 attempts.